Hello again. Welcome back to another episode of... What I'm going to share with you today is something that I have only shared with one other person before this. Today I want to talk about vulnerability. Now, I'm not talking about the act of being vulnerable or being open about who you are. This is a different kind of vulnerable. This is the kind of vulnerable that is very synonymous with gullible. This may come as a surprise to many people, but I am actually an extremely vulnerable individual. And I guess in some ways you could say I'm very gullible. It's a little difficult for me to kind of be honest about it because growing up there was a lot of shame in the idea of being gullible. We've all heard that saying like, oh, hey, look, gullible's written on the ceiling. Well, you know kind of how it creates this kind of shame of like, if you're gullible then you're dumb or you are easily manipulated or whatever. Up until very recently, I never really considered the idea of me being vulnerable or gullible because I always saw that as a bad thing, as something that you should be ashamed of or as something that is embarrassing. And to be honest, I still feel a lot of that shame, and that's kind of part of why I feel like I need to make this video, because I need to be honest about that aspect of who I am, because simply pretending that I'm not like that isn't going to get me anywhere. There are many examples of how this has played out in my life, but there's one in particular that I want to share with you, because I think it really shows how problematic this vulnerability can be if it's not taken seriously. When I was about 15 or 16 years old, I got scammed out of about $400 from somebody online. Now, what you have to understand about this is I had already been buying and selling things online for quite a few years, so this wasn't really a new world to me. It wasn't that I was naive or ignorant. It was the fact that I was vulnerable. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of the details, but this scam was set up in such a way that made it look very logical and rational and not too good to be true. So when I say that I was vulnerable, what I really mean in this situation was that I thought so rationally about it that it didn't make sense for it to possibly be a scam. But it turned out that it was, and I lost $400. For me, being vulnerable means that I almost always assume that people have good intentions. I almost always assume that people are being honest and that people are being true in what they're doing or saying. And if you have spent any time on the internet, you know that that's definitely not true. A lot of people on the internet are not being honest, and a lot of people on the internet do not have good intentions. And as much as I can know that in my head, my thought processes are still always going to be that kind of rational, well, why would they lie to you? Or why wouldn't they be good kind of thought processes? Because whether I like it or not, as someone on the spectrum, that's just how my brain works. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I am very vulnerable, and that means I have to be very careful about who I am friends with and who I talk to and how I talk to them. Because most of the time I'm probably not going to get scammed out of $400, but it is pretty likely that I'm going to think that somebody is being serious when they're not, or I'm going to think they're joking when they're being serious. Now here's the thing. Being vulnerable is actually a very, very common thing for people who are on the autism spectrum. And unfortunately, a lot of them get taken advantage of, just like I did many years ago when I lost $400. And obviously I can't make a statement about all of these people's situations because everybody is different. But I feel like, in my experience, a lot of why this happens is that because we tend to be rational thinkers, we usually just think it wouldn't make sense for them to be lying. And I don't just mean in situations where you might get scammed out of $400. I'm also referring to situations where someone might be being sarcastic, and then you think that they're being serious, and then there's a disconnect. That is a kind of less serious example of how people on the spectrum can be kind of vulnerable. So if you know someone who has an autism spectrum disorder, chances are pretty good that a lot of what I said about myself can also be applied to them. What we need is just a little bit of patience and a little bit of protection, maybe, because sometimes we just can't help but assume the best and that isn't always what we should do. And if you're someone who is a lot like me, please know that it's okay to be this way. You are not wrong for being vulnerable. It can make things difficult sometimes, that is true. But it doesn't mean that who you are is bad. And if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to have a conversation with those who are close to you about this topic, because it's very important to be able to be honest about who you are. And I know it can be scary to talk about this stuff, believe me. I mean, I'm only just now making this video about it, and I'm almost 25 years old. It's nothing to be ashamed of, because it's who you are, and you should never be ashamed of who you really are. Thank you for letting me share this with you. It was a bit hard to talk about this, but I think it's really important. I don't want other people to have to wait 25 years to be able to be honest about who they are. If you would like to watch any more of the videos that I've made in this series, I will put a link to a playlist in the description below this video where you can see all of the other videos that I made in the Autism and Me series. That just about wraps up this Autism and Me video. So until next time, I hope that you take care of yourself, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching. Bye!